Everybody, welcome to this session called Satellite IoT Playing to Its Potential. So my name is Nathan de Ruiter, I'm a Managing Director at Euroconsult. If you were here yesterday as well, I did kind of an opening presentation where we kind of highlighted the Super 7 market opportunities in the space sector, and IoT is definitely one of them. But I also have to say, if you look at kind of where the market stands today, you can see the Gartner and all the other kind of overall market reports. Obviously, IoT is a massive market. Gartner talks about $300 billion of revenue per year. Anyway, not quoting me on those numbers, but if I just look at the satellite market, which we are focused on, right? We do market intelligence, research, consulting on the space sector, and IoT is one of them. It's still a pretty small market, right? Revenues maybe add up to around 400 million. If you just take IoT, if you take narrowband, it gets maybe to 4, 5, 6, 700 million. But again, so it shows that today's market of satellite in the IoT kind of overall market opportunity is a very small market share or capture. So I think there are definitely new things happening. There's new players coming to the market, new business models. But again, the topic really of today is playing to its potential. So we want to kind of help and dive into to understand how is it used today, what is the kind of overall value proposition of satellite-based IoT, what are the pain points. We'll talk a bit about direct to cell. There was a different session earlier, but it has some very close connection to this topic too. So we'll talk about that too, and I'm opening it up as well for audience questions. So feel free to make the way, raise your hand. I will give a few times the opportunity to ask questions, and please don't hold back. But before we go there, I would like to, we're not going to do any presentations, we're just going to do a Q&A. And I would like to ask each kind of individual to kind of introduce themselves, briefly explain as well the company they're representing, and maybe they're kind of to kind of situate a discussion, what is their play in the satellite IoT, what kind of perspective they will bring to this panel on this topic. So Alexander, you're next to me, so if you can go start first.
Thank you, Nathan. So my name is Alexander Jeuck. I'm working in the satellite, SATCOM and telecom industry over the last 30 years. Initially as an employee for Airbus, SES, ST Engineering, and later started a kind of advisory consultancy company. And there we are having clients from various angles. Some people who want to invest, some people who are searching the money, some people who like to be innovative, drive innovations. But I think the most interesting is working with people who really having applications, having demands and needs. And when I'm thinking back in principle on IoT or even on, how shall I say, initially these narrowband networks were always used for critical infrastructure or something you want to make sure you get the data out because it's so important. You take the effort and to make sure you get it, you are happy if it is narrowband. But of course now if we talk about IoT, sometimes we are crossing maybe already the line. Is it a broadband service? Is it narrowband service? Is it both together? Will the people who are doing the broadband service eat up at the end of the day also the narrowband services? That is something we are looking in, and happy to be part of this discussion.
Thanks, Alexander. I am Gaurav Kharod, representing Intelsat in Asia Pac. As you all know, probably Intelsat is a satellite service provider. We've now moved over into providing managed services across the board for networks, for maritime, for in-flight connectivity, etc. And I think IoT sits somewhere in the middle of all these different verticals that I just mentioned. We believe the satellite industry, and this is going to be my pitch throughout what I speak. I think as an industry, we are lagging behind in terms of IoT, addressing the IoT vertical. And we as Intelsat would want to get into the forefront of providing a service on IoT, providing a solution around IoT, which is more in line with what has already happened in the IoT industry per se, where a lot of IoT solutions globally have already been deployed, but most of these are deployed around the terrestrial technologies or have been deployed by the MNOs of the world. And therefore, one of my key discussion points on this panel is going to be what is it that satellite companies like us, constellations in the MSS band or the LEO constellations, what is it that we need to do to increase our share in the market space for IoT? And I generally feel there is, as Nathan mentioned, there's a huge market potential, but then we need to step up, we need to create the next level of competencies rather than just be connectivity players in the satellite world for IoT applications.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jassem Nasser. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer at IASat. And I've been with Thuraya and IASat for now almost 25 years. Currently, I look after a portfolio in terms of product and services, as well as business development and market development, and also strategic partnerships and alliances. As an operator of 2 mobile satellite services assets operating in L-band frequency, you can imagine that IoT M2M is very relevant to us. And from business perspective, if you look at mobile satellite services, you'll see that IoT M2M is probably number 1 or number 2 in terms of the market segments that are projected with the highest growth. Maybe Nathan can shed the light from the work that Euroconsult does. When we look at M2M IoT, we sort of try to categorize it between high data rate services, medium data rate services, and low data rate services. And as you move downward in terms of the data rate capability, is basically you're looking into lower ARPU, but very high volume of devices or terminals, and this is where we believe is the market. The way we think about M2M and IoT today is that it just got out of the nascency kind of stage and moving into the growth stage. So we're yet to move into the maturity phase, which we believe that will be probably between 2030 and 2040. I'm sure many of you follow what is happening in terms of direct-to-device and 5G NTN, and you will see it very relevant to the L-band and S-band spectrum. So that's another sort of angle that makes it very relevant and very connected to what we do. And if you follow IASat and Thuraya, you will see that in the last 1-2 years we have made certain investments and developments that are purely targeted into how we address and target the M2M and IoT market in terms of the portfolio as well as the verticals. So hopefully during this session we'll be able to shed more light in terms of what we do for IoT and M2M. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Punit Goel. I'm a system design engineer in Hughes Systique. So basically, I'm a software engineer, and I started my career with Satcom. Hughes, which is a pioneer in satellite communication technology, has various broadband system like Jupiter. I've been working in the circuit side and the ground station network for many customers, like for Geo and Leo, enabling the data as well as call. IoT for us will be the next, IoT in satellite for us will be the next big thing, with 3GPP in its release 17 and release 18 setting the new standards. There will be new changes in the NB IoT and LTE-M to enable direct to device and with the IoT market projected to be around $8.7 billion in around 2030. This gives us a lot of opportunity for everyone to have a share of the pie in the economy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ajay Jain from Lamhas Satellite Services. Although the name satellite is there, but in IoT, we already working for the application development. We have developed few applications on IoT. We are using the sensors for different verticals like mining and logistics. But today, till now, it was only the GSM connected IoT. But when we started doing this, we found there's a great need of connectivity. GSM is not there all the time. Connected internet is also not there. So we did a study, case study in mines of Chhattisgarh. The mines are 15 kilometer long, and there's no connectivity. There's no GSM. There's no other connectivity. So the mine operators, because the government regulations for the state and the center, they need to have connectivity and all the data available. So they were creating the Wi-Fi spots. So they were spending crores of rupees in creating towers, making Wi-Fi's hotspots. But the mines, after a few years, it will get shifted. So I think then we talked about IoT solution via satellite, and it's an ideal solution. But unfortunately, we don't have the proper terminals, the service provider till now. But I'm sure it will come, so we'll be able to give the services via satellite also.
We can use the other one.
Do we have another microphone maybe? We shift to the middle and then... Good. Great, and I think great introductions. I think you already touched on a lot of things that we want to discuss, or already heard about some project examples, some challenges, positioning, but let's unpack it step by step. So maybe first question, also to help some of the audience as well, okay, the positioning, the role of satellite in this IoT kind of market opportunity. And maybe more specifically, do you see there a role of, let's say, more a dedicated satellite solution, or is it more towards a hybrid, like a hybrid wireless cellular and satellite kind of sensors in the market? Where do you see kind of the market for this opportunity particularly going towards? Do you think there's one, there's both, or which one would you think would be more dominant? So anyway, maybe, well, Alexander, you can start, and then we don't have to go all the time. You kind of indicate to me when you would like to add to it, and we'll, so we can go.
Okay. So I think first we maybe, if we look about satellite IoT, we see there are two ways at least. Yeah. One is utilizing the satellite as a backhauling for IoT networks, and the other one is in principle to really having a service direct to the device. Utilizing different spectrum, yeah, and the backhauling, I think this is what we have seen quite for a while, and the nice thing for the satellite service provider is backhauling means aggregation of traffic, makes more sense, more business, yeah. Now, if you are thinking about direct to device, you need to have plenty of these devices, otherwise it makes no sense. And same time as we have usually in IoT, most of the traffic is not real time. Yeah, we can accept certain delay and latency. This allows also new players, startups, to get into that market. Even with one satellite, for example, you could start an IoT service. Yeah, the question is it sustainable or not? That I think this is interesting from a satellite perspective, yeah, that it allows in principle to enter into a market which was very difficult to get in because it was usually done by the local players, the local telecom players alone.
Maybe Gaurav, yeah, the backhauling part is what I suppose Intelsat plays well into, so maybe you can comment on that.
So I would want to break the IoT market into two parts broadly, and for the ease of understanding, we'll use the same terminology as NB and broadband. So NB is narrowband IoT, and I think that's where my colleague here from Thuraya has a play with the L-band and the S-band spectrum there, which is typically the MSS spectrum identified for satellite services. Now, to me, the narrowband IoT segment is largely a device-driven, hardware-driven market with low service revenue and low connectivity revenue. As compared to that, if we go towards the broadband IoT segment, and there are a few verticals there which are really of interest to the broadband satellite segment, primarily talking about engine diagnostics for a shipping company or for an aircraft aviation industry. I think if we look at those kind of markets which are driven by connectivity and driven by this service, we would place that under the broadband IoT market, and there is a business case which can drive a satellite constellation addressing the broadband IoT market. And I think that the division which I was trying to make primarily was narrowband IoT, mass market volumes driven by the devices, broadband IoT, volumes driven mostly by this service and by the connectivity side of things. Of course, one important aspect across any of these segments is the end-to-end application or the use case. And I think that's another part where the satellite companies need to step up, but I think that's a discussion for another question probably. But broadly, IoT as merely a connectivity solution is not a great idea. IoT end-to-end with an application approach, with a use case behind it is what we should all be looking at.
Good, Jassem. Clearly, maybe also good for the audience to understand, the choice of using L-band, what advantages it bring for the Thuraya network, and maybe some other views on the role of satellite.
Okay, I go back to your question whether it is a hybrid play or it's a satellite play. In my view, I think it's a hybrid play. I think this is what you see today from the different use cases. If you engage with the end users, what you see is that you see it being divided between people who are really interested in a terrestrial kind of connectivity, and people who need satellite because there is no terrestrial coverage or there is no terrestrial service. But in between, you'll see people who do want a hybrid service, and sometimes they just move along with a terrestrial only because the satellite is not there, or it's just difficult to integrate, or it's not ready and they need to move forward. But I think you'll see more in terms of a hybrid kind of terrestrial satellite connectivity versus just a satellite only or a terrestrial only. And I think that's one of the evidences is what's happening within 3GPP in terms of the standardization. This is why you see terrestrial standards being adopted now for satellite by 5G NTN and NB-IoT. When you look at the two kind of categories, aggregation, data aggregation, which is more of a higher throughput, and it's more characterized like a project base compared to direct to device or direct to sensor, where the sensors will connect directly to the satellite, and then these will need to support kind of long battery life, and they'll be associated with a low kind of a service fee or a low ARPU. Yeah, it's a mix between a service and a hardware play. But like my colleague said earlier, if you look at the whole ecosystem of the IoT, between hardware, connectivity, management platform, application platform, then analytics, you'll see the connectivity having a small part of the whole value really. Maybe there is more value into analytics and application platforms compared to hardware and connectivity. But as a satellite operator, we can't be going and doing full end-to-end on our own. We'd rather do it in partnership, because when it comes to IoT, I think you realize when you engage on different use cases is that there is a lot of localization, customization that is required that can only be satisfied by local players. So I think trying to do full end-to-end on your own, I think it's a risky game. I think it's rather be done with alliances and partnerships.
Good. Yeah, no, I'll definitely talk a bit more about the analytics part as well. Yeah, Punit, maybe just anything to add to it is as well. Maybe situate Hughes in this this kind of environment. Not necessarily making the sensors, or you make a lot of terminals as well, but this is not necessarily part of the ecosystem. So it's more on the aggregator, kind of providing the terminals. How do you see the opportunity for satellite IoT in the overall? Would it be more hybrid or the dedicated kind of satellite play? What do you think would be?
I think I'll agree with Mr. Jassem that it will be more of a hybrid. The main challenge with the satellite IoT becomes the cost, and when there will be an integration or convergence with the terrestrial network, and it will increase the number of subscribers, users for this, and that will bring down the cost as well. Regarding the use cases, agriculture, we all talk about that it is the next big thing which use IoT and many billion dollars in it. I see another thing is healthcare with the advent of wearable watches, trackers and all. And let's say there are other smart devices like defibrillators, automatic defibrillators, which send the data to doctors and all. And if we want a real connectivity, and suppose person is traveling to remote areas, and and it is sending the data to the doctor with a terrestrial network, and in a remote area, if there is no satellite connectivity, it may lead to the loss of data, and there can be other consequences as well. So it should be a hybrid model.
Okay. Ajay, maybe as well your view on hybrid versus dedicated, and then as a well-informed, you're planning yourself a satellite constellation, if that's correct. Or your plans for that kind of network development? Could you explain a little bit the plans of the company that you're to pursue?
Yeah, it will be hybrid, but the main challenge is the terminal cost. Because when we talk about IoT, it's not a few numbers, it's not 100. We're talking about 50,000 numbers of terminals. Of course, with the numbers, the satellite connectivity will also go. The bandwidth consumption will also increase. But what the market is looking at is one is the solution, ideal solution for them, application. And the second is the cost of the terminal. The terminal, ideally terminal should be 6 by 6. The size of the terminal, which can be mounted on the move or on the pause. So these are some of the requirements which is coming up. We are waiting for certain regulations to be cleared from the government. But of course, we already working on the application integration of IoT devices, which is the terminal for me. With the application and with the sensors, various sensors. There's so many sensors in the market, different kind of sensors. Integration of those sensors into the IoT device is a challenge. It's not just a backhaul that the easiest thing is to do is to get all the sensors giving data to one device and then connect it to the satellite to send the data, which is kind of a VSAT work. There's no rocket science in that.
Yeah.
So actually challenge is the device and the connectivity through the device.
Okay. So maybe continue on this thing. So you highlighted a very fair point that the terminal, the sensor price need to go down. So let's assume this price, maybe name a price. If you could lower it, what was your wish price? Yeah, first part of the question. Second, then, what kind of new use case would you be able to do if you kind of reduce the price by this? What kind of use case you think would it open up here in India, being allowed to do what currently is prohibited because of the price?
One of the new cases, like with the IoT device, with there could be application where you can do the voice also. Like Apple is doing it. Yeah. Why can't we do it with the other devices? For fisheries, when they go to the sea, there can be distress. There can be there are people who are developing voice connectivity over the IoT device, but again, it's a regulated challenge. I'm sure it will be cleared in coming time. GMPS is one of the solutions, and our government is giving the solution lessons to that. The only company which has a GMPCS license is BSNL right now. So we are working with them also.
Okay. So yeah, maybe talking a bit about use case, I think it's always helpful for people to understand what is it really about, right? Kind of what satellite IoT can do. So if you could either preferably a project here in India, or is there some examples that you can share? But otherwise, if it's not in India, just some examples internationally, the project you've implemented that you can really highlight that demonstrate the advantage. Can be a bit more detailed, a bit more context is interesting, I think, for people. So, yeah, Punit, you're already. So maybe you can give one. Okay. And get started, and then we'll ask the others.
So you use practical use cases in India.
Yeah. So two things. Maybe in generally, is the market in India is still maybe in its early phase. Let's put it like that. But if there are examples, and Mr. Ajay already highlighted a few. Great to hear about the examples currently implemented. It's kind of helping the people understand. But if you don't have an example, maybe then think about an international project or something else that you think would be pretty well fitting here in India, for example, as well, an example.
See, in India is a vast country, and there is a lot of train travel, rail travel. And there is one use case that perfectly fits into it, because in past we have seen a lot of collisions between trains and other things. So Government of India did a project in which they put the IoT devices on Vande Bharat train, which runs from New Delhi. And there are a lot of data and IoT sensors they are there, which collect the data and send it to a central command. And that prevents in avoiding collisions. So it's a collision avoidance system that is already in place in India for Vande Bharat train. Another example I can think of, there is a city in eastern India, Kohima. So they have automated many of their traffic system using the IoT, and there is a lot of saving in electricity and all with that.
So those are great examples. I like it. Jassem, we have some views, either India or of course Thuraya. There's plenty of examples, but if you have to pick your favorite, which would it be?
I'll share three use cases spread across the world. So one is use of an M2M or IoT device for fire detection prevention. This is to stop the widespread of fires, and actually this is one of the terminals that we have within the portfolio, and it's being used in the Americas. Another use case is for one of the terminals that we have, T2M, is being used for car theft prevention, and this is a use case from Africa actually. And it's a dual mode device that has terrestrial as well as satellite connectivity. And a third use case is from Australia, and this was actually to implement the measures of lockdown and social distancing during the pandemic. So the authorities in Australia, they needed to monitor or to basically look at the cars are within the region that they're supposed to, and they're not, be in other regions. So they will look at the car plate, take a picture. There's a sort of compression technique, and then it will upload to a system, and then it will determine whether it is supposed to be in that zone or in that region or not. So that was done through the Thuraya X5 Touch terminal. Now, these are existing use cases with the existing portfolio. When we talk about the future, especially when we look at the low data rate and the direct to sensor, and we're talking about devices, satellite terminals that are in the range of $30 or $20, then we really talk about different use cases. Then we're talking about something like livestock tracking. We're talking about smart agriculture. I agree, fisheries or maritime is one of the industries and markets that can benefit from a lower price point for hardware. There are certain use cases that we see today. we're not able to address it with the existing portfolio. And with a lower hardware pricing, I think those use cases can be penetrated.
Good.
So since they've sequentially given 1, 2, 3, I'm going to give 4 use cases.
Wow. Okay, Alexander, you're up to 5.
No, I was just joking. I'll not bore you with too many, but I'll give you 2 examples, 2 use cases. One international where Intelsat is a part of, the other one more Indian. So let me start with the one in Germany where Intelsat has tied up with Deutsche Telekom, which is the local telco MNO there. The application is very interesting. It is simplistic, but it needs a very high uptime, a reliability of service which cannot be guaranteed on a terrestrial network. So the application that we're talking here is, in Germany, there is a rule that when aircrafts land into an airport, there have to be lights around the landing strip. And this is, of course, for safety and stuff like that. And these lights, there is no way that they can switch off, even during night time, because there was no concept of controlling these lights originally. But then there were complaints from surrounding areas, from forest areas, from residents close by, that the lights were glaring. Of course, there is a safety angle to it which had to be completely adhered to. So in came Intelsat along with a cloud-based IoT solution, wherein we track the aircraft landing data, and then we switch off the lights once the aircraft has landed safely. And then the next aircraft comes after a few, especially this is more true for nighttime when there is not a regular travel incoming aircraft coming into the airstrip. And therefore we switch on, switch off the lights with a very high uptime. So you cannot really miss out on switching on the lights when an aircraft is landing, right? And I think that is the key element of the entire IoT solution on satellite, which gives the high uptimes that we desired to have the solution with Deutsche Telekom. So that was one global example that we have. But then let me come to the India segment, and let's talk about fisheries. In fact, I had the good fortune of talking to Vivek from Sankhya Labs. He must be somewhere here. And I talked fisheries in specific as a market. I think Sankhya Labs is trying to develop, or already has developed, a solution around fisheries, which talks about, at a low price point, how do you get into the use cases of a fisherman? And this is not the fish boat owner, who's a rich guy probably sitting in a 5-star hotel and identifying where the boats will get back to. But it is the fisherman on the boat who is risking his life out there in the sea. He doesn't even know, he doesn't have geolocation for himself, whether he's stepping outside of Indian waters. Will he step outside and he will get caught by maybe pirates, will get caught in a storm. So there are applications which Sankhya talked to me about, Vivek talked to me about, wherein they have installed on fishermen's boats, low cost, a surveillance equipment, a monitoring equipment, a geo-tracking device, a hooter with an alert. So as soon as they step out from the geographical boundaries of Indian waters, there is a hooter which gives them an alarm, which tells them to come back into the Indian area. There is weather monitoring and weather alerts. So if there is a storm coming, they get to hear all that through that audio system. So I think there is a lot of applications. The railways, the example that someone mentioned here. There is a lot of IoT applications. And again, I go back to the point which I started off talking. Use cases. I think the 5G world talks about use cases. The satellite world still needs to understand what exactly is the value behind a use case. It is these applications that serve a purpose. They bring in the value, a socio-economic value for a fisherman, for example. Maybe a different value for an agriculture vertical or a mining vertical. But I think that's where we all should be looking at what is the value we bring in as a satellite company, maybe in a hybrid network, maybe in a standalone network. But unless we bring in that value at the right economics, we won't be able to really see the growth that we want to.
Okay, I don't take 5, I take even more. So I was thinking about if we're having more, cheaper, better IoT devices, we can support much, much better the sustainable development goals. And this is, for example, in the domain of supporting utility companies, be it water companies, leaking water is a big problem. We have to preserve water on Earth, yeah, as much as possible. Energy companies, they need to know with smart meters where's the power going. There are so many independent solar power stations now also. To bring that all together, in principle, it is, you need to understand your customer base, you need to understand your deliveries from the factory to the end, be it a fleet management system, be it an asset management system. All that can only be handled with getting some data, yeah? And the data cannot always come through the normal GSM networks. You want to have that consistently, yeah, because I think that is the point. If you're going into data collection and utilizing data, you need to have consistently that data. Otherwise, you are breaking that information chain, and then it's not useless, but it doesn't have the same value. And there, exactly, satellite can play a huge role, helping to provide that consistent availability of more useful data at the end of the day.
That's great. Very good examples. Well, maybe an invitation to the audience. I'm happy to borrow my mic for a few seconds or minutes. Anyone in the audience has maybe a use case on satellite IoT that's not been discussed that you'd like to share? And I'm happy to do so. I'm just seeing and not seeing any takers yet. Yes, please. Anyone else had any other use case example that they've seen? No? Good. But let's talk a bit about the Indian market today, and if we can get a bit more specific. What are you kind of seeing as the pain points today to make really, okay, make this a big market opportunity, right? We're putting these forecasts out. You need to make it realize that they're going to be real, right? I depend on that, on you. So if you then look at, okay, what are we struggling with? We had already some things talked about earlier in terms of the terminal price, but you know, just highlighting some of the pain points we need to work through as an industry to really kind of unlock this market potential. So maybe, Ajay, if you want to take this one first. You don't have a microphone, we'll get them one to you very quickly. So what are the biggest pain points, you being active in India, and that, you know, we really need to change to kind of really make the market grow?
The only pain point today is one is the satellite bandwidth. India is a tough terrain, like we have rains, heavy rains. So today, whatever the experiment we are doing is on the KU band IoT terminals. And the rains, because of the terminal size is very small, rains affect it very badly. And some other factors are there, like the power. I was talking to some ministers. They want to monitor the animals in the jungle. They have sensors, and they want to like track the tigers or whatever they want to, and they want to have a device which has a longer battery, which can last for 10 years, 7 years, and plus satellite connectivity. So I don't see any technology right now, but there are certain requirements which needs to be solved. So these are few pain points which, like, people are wanting to have this technology, IoT devices, but the technology is not developing so fast. The satellite is there. The hardware is not there.
Good. No, very good point. Punit, do you want?
I think Mr. Ajay covered most of the points. From the technical perspective, I can talk about when we design a system and with these satellites like LEO or GEO, there is always a challenge in due to the Doppler effect as the satellites are moving very fast. So there is a challenge with the Doppler effect, and there is a latency issue as well. There are these are the like technical challenges we face. Other than that, the power thing, yes, power is definitely an issue. There are certain things coming up, like LoRaWAN, which is like long range, wide area network, which consumes less power. So there are solutions that are coming up. We still need to enhance them. That's it.
From my perspective, these are challenges on like international basis. One is, of course, pricing. We talked about it, and especially the hardware pricing. And I think that the way to go about it is that we should be stepping out of this traditional way that we sell, because when the end customer is presented with a price for hardware, price for service, and price for like value-added services, he starts to see these different buckets, and then it's something that is large and maybe inconvenient or unrealistic. But if you're selling system as a service, and you're saying to the end customer, I'm going to deliver this service to you, this is the use case, this is the benefit that you're going to get, and it's going to cost you per month this much. It's just a single dollar value, not split between hardware, service, and value-added services, then it might very well make sense for the end customer as opposed to the traditional way. But one of the challenges that we do face today is that even within a single country, there is different local requirements and customization. Currently, we're engaged in a use case and an opportunity for maritime industry in one of the countries in Asia. And this has been engaged now over 6 months. And it has been going back and forth between us and the end customer and the authorities that are engaged, in terms of customizing the data presentation and the format the data will be presented and will reach to the end user, and how many times they will be able to report the messaging from the assets and poll the data. And that's a really pain point, because this is one authority that you're dealing with. Another authority within the same country, they will have a different requirement. This fragmentation within the ecosystem, especially when it comes to simply the application platform or the analytics part of it, is a real pain point, because this is where it gets challenging and it demotivates the satellite operators or the service providers on the ground. They don't have that capability to sustain pursuing an opportunity for more than 3 months or more than 6 months. That's the real pain point. And I think the other pain point that maybe satellite operators face is, while satellite operators, I think they have the capability to support multiple air interfaces or waveforms. For example, we could support LoRaWAN, we could support NB-IoT, I can support proprietary IoT technologies, but then I can't support 5 of them at the same time, because satellite resources are limited, and you need to focus on 1 or 2 technologies at most, because you have limited spectrum and you have limited resources that you need to focus on. And then you need to decide in terms of how you match between the technologies that you want to support and how does that match with the use cases on the ground. When someone covers 150 countries and you have different technology requirements from each country of the 150 countries, it becomes a nightmare. So you need to make the best decisions. Back to Ajay's point, to be frank, one of the technologies or one of the IoT platforms that we're working on is going to support a very high link margin. So in terms of we're using L-band spectrum, which is very resilient for harsh weather conditions, but that technology will be able to support like 10 to 15 dB like link margin. So there's no issue there. And from power consumption or battery lifetime, it's going to support like 5 years depending on the frequency of messaging, but that's going to support like 5 years battery life for most of the applications. So from technological perspective, I think we're going to overcome those issues in the near term, but there are, of course, other challenges.
Good, yeah, no, that's a very good point, I think, and it comes maybe, or if you want to talk a little bit about it too, it's even a bigger perspective about how do you achieve skill, right, in this industry, and I think, yes, I'm important to a lot of points that, you know, standardization, interoperability is something that there's still some ways to go. How do you see that? Do you, you know, looking kind of, it can be a pain point, but at the end we do want to get skill, and that's some of the pain points we're looking at, right? Is there share the views, or have you a different view?
Sure. I think a couple of key elements that we believe are the pain points for driving the scale, as you said. I think, of course, there could be many, but I'll prioritize the number one, number two. To me, the biggest area, especially for the IoT market, which is in most parts of the world on the satellite side, I would still call it as a nascent market, which is still moving into a growth phase, not even mature. So differentiating a mature market, let's say an enterprise broadband market or a cellular backhaul kind of a market. These are mature markets, and we know the players in the ecosystem. We know the system integrators on the ground, the service providers who can install terminals, etc. on the ground. We know these are well-established segments in most parts of the world. We can't say the same for IoT. So I think the biggest pain point is to establish an ecosystem which can deliver an IoT service. And I'm with you, with Jassem, saying that the satellite operator cannot provide an end-to-end solution. But the need of the hour is indeed an end-to-end solution because it's in a nascent stage in the growth phase. So we need end-to-end solutions. One player or two players cannot deliver that solution. The ecosystem is not yet developed. We need more players like Mr. Ajay Jain in India who step up and say, let's stitch together a solution across the satellite, across the end terminals, across the application layer, across a cloud delivery platform, etc. So I think that's topic number one, which I believe every country should strive in creating an ecosystem which can deliver an IoT solution for different use cases. The second one, and I will allude to the same point which Jassem mentioned. Satellite as a technology, I think there are pros and cons, but if we have to summarize what is the price point? So if I have to summarize that in a pain point, I would say where there is capacity and where there is broadband, there is a lack of economics. And where there is economics, there's a lack of capacity and broadband. So there could be economics on the L-band, on the S-band, in rolling out IoT services, but then that is a narrowband service that we can deliver. If you're talking broadband delivery of service for, let's say, device engine diagnostics, the terminal size is prohibitive. The economics are prohibitive. So there is a technology gap which still needs to be bridged so that broadband IoT can be delivered at affordable economics, and that's where the market is going to grow eventually, if we can bridge that gap.
Alexander, your perspective on
Okay, so scaling means in principle either you are creating partnerships. I think that is something which is very important. Yeah, people have to understand where there is the strengths of the satellite operator, the system integrator, and people who can utilize the data. The other thing is standardization, whereby I have to say that standardization is good. It's also a good intention, but comes also sometimes to a point where the differentiation is then challenging, and that can hurt the business case because you are competing suddenly with everyone who is following that standard. And then the other side, when we are scaling and something is developing in a mainstream standard, yeah, connectivity is getting commodity, people maybe don't give it the value and appreciation they maybe should give. We should still also not forget, if we talk about IoT networks, what is happening with people who want to have private IoT networks. And coming back to the pain point, I had, for example, a customer who said, I don't want to join all these platforms. I having certain assets I want to keep under my control, but I need very narrow data. Okay, so we were looking around, what can we do? And at the end of the day, we were going not with an MSS solution, we were going with a kind of VSAT solution. But on the VSAT systems, you have the problem, if your carrier is not a certain size, your demodulator doesn't want to lock, and so on. But this, let's say, mass market, platform-driven scaling is one thing, yeah. But we should not forget that IoT is, in my eyes, coming from the demand of having very critical, very sensitive data under your own control. And so there will be maybe also a market, a niche market for specialized companies who can play that private IoT combined with platforms. Yeah.
Yeah, let's maybe continue a bit on that. And I want to, right after this, I'm going to ask for audience questions. So I'll give you 1 more minute or so to think about those. We didn't talk really about defense or security as a use case so far. It would be interesting to get your perspective. Is that, so start maybe with Jassem. Defense must be a big user already for IoT, narrowband kind of type. What is the, well, maybe highlight a little bit the security part of it, how you can make it a secure environment. And how do you see the potential there? Do you see, future growth in that part of it, or is it already well adopted across your users? And Alexander will give you, and then I will give others. This is optional, so if you want to talk about defense, security, raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go to the audience questions.
Sure. No, as you know, the 3 top market segments for mobile satellite services are government, maritime, and end-to-end IoT. So naturally, the government is a high growth market segment, and the governments are the biggest spenders when it comes to SATCOM services. That's in general. But when it comes to IoT and M2M, as you would understand, personnel tracking, assets tracking, and we're talking about very high value assets. It's very important to locate these assets, monitor them, ensure that they're in the right condition. So from government perspective, use cases, there are definitely use cases that are important for IoT and M2M. And when it comes to security, I mean, it's a threefold or 3-part. It's the space asset security, it's the ground segment or the technology itself, which is like AES 256 or FIPS, and then you have the security at the terminal level. And sometimes we go beyond that by enabling the customer own sort of technology in terms of encryption algorithms that can be used at the terminal side. So we don't restrict the customer to use our encryption technologies, but they can bring in their own and use it on the terminal. Currently, we're engaged on the Thuraya 4 next generation system, which is a complete system, including the satellite Thuraya 4, which is contracted with Airbus Defence and Space. We have ground segment that is being developed with multiple platforms. One of them is with Cobham Satcom for broadband services, but we did announce another platform which is primarily dedicated for government use case, something we call LTS, location tracking system. It's very similar to the system that is used by the US DoD and other DoDs. It's called Blue Force tracking. So if normally Blue Force tracking is really categorized like an M2M kind of a service, because it's mostly about location and asset and personal tracking, and it allows you to identify the foe from the friendly forces. in addition to being able to deliver information related to C2SA, so situational awareness. So that is one of the systems that we're investing in, and this is with Comtech, and this is part of the whole Thuraya 4 next generation system. And then the third category from the whole program is the development of multiple terminals. So we're going to have a new rich portfolio of products and services that will be delivered by these products, by these ground systems and platforms working on the new satellite. So as you see, a lot of the investment is going into the government solutions, and at least one of them is categorized within the M2M and IoT kind of services.
Very good. Anyone else want to take on defense? No other takers? No? Good. Audience, are there any questions? If so, please raise your hand. Yeah, there's two.
Glad that you brought the defense topic in. So just want to know as to what is the scale, because you've got aerospace resources, you've got land systems as well as maritime resources. So which are the maximum yeah, thanks. So who's the maximum user as of now? And primarily since I deal with land systems, so which is the field, whether you are talking in terms of real-time operations, total asset visibility, or to the maintenance functions? What are that you're looking at? Because on a daily basis, and then there are the issues of security, especially with private cloud being required for the armed forces vis-a-vis the public cloud. So some of those views in case, because it seems the Indian people don't have too much of say in this, so anybody from outside or whatever.
Okay, so maybe I take a try, yeah? So, okay, one thing is the Blue Force tracking, but the other side is then battlefield management systems, yeah? But what does it mean, yeah? Do you need broadband connectivity, or do you need to have connectivity, yeah? Because limited data is better than no data. And that is something where IoT is playing a role, definitely. But for me, when we're talking about defense, I know it's not always the same, but let's talk about homeland security also. And that means border control, for example. There you can do a lot with additional sensors, but also in disaster response, because I think it's in all countries in the world, the armed forces, they are having an important and integral part to play when there's a disaster, yeah, be it natural or human-made. And that's exactly when it's important to understand where is the asset and how to manage that. But can you run that through an independent IoT network or a cloud-based? What satellites? Yeah, LEO maybe then not the right approach. You go to GEO. Yeah, so again, you may be having your own spectrum. Some countries they have S or L band, but yeah, I think there's a lot of importance in these narrow band transmissions, which is sometimes overseen when we are talking about all the broadband services by Starlink and others. Yeah.
I'll just add a little bit of an Indian color to this. I'm assuming, sir, you would have some defense background. Though I represent Intelsat, which is a global player, why I did not respond to the original question was that because we are a global player, there are regulatory circumstances in India which whereby we would not be able to have a play in the defense market. But since you asked the question in greater detail, let me attempt at responding as to what could be a good solution. So under the Indian scenario, you would need definitely an Indian VSAT service provider or a GMPCS service provider, and there are a few in this room as well, who would be able to provide a service to you. There are satellites which have been approved by the Indian government. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, there is no real regulatory guideline or a license specific to IoT or M2M in India. That is covered under the VSAT CUG license. And therefore, I'm sure your system integrators like the BEL folks here in the audience, or some of the licensed service providers like like Lamhas or Cloudcast, they should be able to integrate, and that's where my point comes in. They should be able to integrate a solution that can provide you what you need in terms of your tracking or engine diagnostics, etc. But yes, there is a whole ecosystem that needs to come together to provide that solution. That was my original point.
Anyone else? I think there was another question right next.
I am from agriculture sector, and basically I am from Indian Council of Agriculture Research, where we are running a network program on precision agriculture across different segments of agriculture. That includes horticulture, field crops, aquaculture, livestock, on other sectors also, farm machinery and others. We have a problem that IoT devices, service providers basically, they deal with only one of the sectors, specified sectors. And when you look to the Indian agricultural sector, where farmers have everything, farmers have land, farmers may grow, have a horticulture production, now farmers are having aquaculture systems also, and field crops are also there. And farmers are basically 85% farmers are small and marginal farmers, so there's a problem. Low economic group of farmers are there, large sectors of Indian agriculture. So what we are facing a problem is, we've developed a lot of SOPs and we have developed the protocols as per the Indian agriculture system, but we are facing problem of rolling it out to the field level. When you go to the field level, one is a cost. So everybody talks about the cost of the device, the economic viability of this whole technology to rolling out to the Indian agriculture system. So I do not know. We need to develop some standardize the devices across different segments. So see, I am a farmer, so I am having aquaculture system also, I am having horticulture also, I go for livestock farming also. So if they talk to each other, because I need one solution, that is one problem. Second problem is, if you have a community kind of service, like in a whole village, all the farmers, they adopt the IoT device, so they should be able to manage together, or cluster of villages, if you roll it out, then it will be cheaper also. So I do not know what is the solution, but for rolling it out, even for demonstration also at the farmers field, we are facing problem. Other problem for demonstration is when you try to demonstrate to the farmers field, there's a problem of theft. There's other problems. And so there are other problems also. That is the point. If you have a community kind of system of integrating of all IoT devices together to address the problem of the Indian agriculture basically, so that will be better, I think. Thank you.
This is one of the growing field. What we are doing is we are talking to few cooperatives, like milk cooperatives in Gujarat, for giving some POCs where the IoT devices are installed and their applications, they will be installed. And the government is also supporting in this through cooperatives. So I'm sure in agriculture there will be cooperatives, there will be some ecosystem. So right now we are working out this solution with the cooperatives. The cooperative minister is also very supportive in this. And the only way to do through this is through cooperatives.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dharmendra. I work for Hughes India. And my question is to Jassem specifically, and it's a difficult one. Jassem, you can decide not to answer it. Going through this panel, it's evident that IoT is an important area to focus on, and L-band in particular is an interesting service. Today in Indian scenario, there is only one player, and through its local partner, it's pretty much monopoly running in for many, many years. And which means the end users are not getting competitive service. And knowing the past history, leave aside the past history, now today Thuraya is owned by Yahsat, which is one of the premium satellite operator, and which is owned by Mubadala, which is over $150 billion group, and having its relationships with the biggest companies in India. What's your view? Are you looking at doing something about it, coming into India strategically? Because, recently India was hit with a cyclone. And it was actually a joke, government telling that we will distribute 20 satellite phones in a cyclone which was hit in multiple states. 20 satellite phones means nothing, very clearly means that's a very, very expensive service today. And with you in Marsat, Iridium, if compete and provide cost-effective service, actually I think it will be good for the industry and the sector and the end users. Your comments on it? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. To give you a bit of history, Thuraya's project started in 1994 or 1995. Business case was developed over 2 years, and the company was incepted in 1997. Believe it or not, when the business case was developed, India represented 20% of the business case. Now, unfortunately, we're operating, or we're covering 150 countries. The services are regularized in 100 countries or so. Unfortunately, we don't have the landing rights yet in India. But the company and I personally have been pursuing, the introduction of the services in India for quite a few years. Definitely with the acquisition by Yahsat, which closed in 2018, and being owned now by Mubadala, which is the investment arm of Abu Dhabi government, that opens up a new chapter. I mentioned earlier about Yahsat investing into a new satellite program, Thuraya 4, which is not just the satellite but the ground and the products. Over $600 million investment. Now, with that program, there is an option to exercise for an additional satellite, which is Thuraya 5. Thuraya 5 is supposed to be the replacement of Thuraya 3 satellite, which is covering today Asia Pacific region. One of the countries that is covered by that satellite is India. So today, in fact, we are looking for partnerships from India, from the region, for the Thuraya 5 satellite. I believe there is a lot of potential in India to work with Thuraya. I think as all governments in the world realized, they started with an incumbent telecom operator, one mobile operator or one telecom operator, and then the market had to be open because there is a need for competition. So I think the same applies for the satellite industry or the satellite sector in any country. I think you need competition to have better services for the consumers, to have better pricing. In fact, if I am a monopoly operator in a country, I would welcome competition because that will keep me on my toes, okay? And it will make me work harder to deliver better services and to have higher market share. So for me, that's a good incentive, not a bad thing to happen. I think, like I said, there's high potential in the Indian market. And over the last 2 days, actually, I learned a lot about the ecosystem that exists today in India. Yesterday I was hearing to one of the sessions to a gentleman. He was talking about a number of things that they're doing within the agriculture market and using of AI and IoT, and I was amazed. I mean, that really helps with the ecosystem that we're looking to build. Like I said, we're not looking to build it on our own, and it doesn't make sense that I bring someone from another country to support me in India when there is a rich, ecosystem of suppliers and partners that can satisfy this better than anyone. So definitely looking forward to coming to India and introducing the services, whether IoT or other services. You will know, I mean, just to let you know, we started operations in 2001. Just in terms of satellite phones, we sold more than 1 million phone to date, and that's without India. So imagine if India was there, I think the number would have doubled easily. So looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jassem, for answering it. And once you conclude your discussions in terms of regulatory side, and we all have heard that India regulatory policy around satellite is getting better and better. We'll be happy to talk to you. As a service provider, we are keen to partner and bring different technologies in India. Thank you.
All right, it was a great presentation. Thank you. Here again. Let me see. Is there anyone? There are just a few more minutes, so if there's one audience question, there's still time for it. Yeah, go ahead. There's one more lady.
Hi, I'm Manu Agrawal from Hughes Systique. So, for example, we have talked about a lot of use cases here. So, there can be some use cases which have strict low latency requirements. So, and in case of even the LEO satellites, the latency is there. So, how that kind of use cases first of all, can those use cases with low latency requirements catered by satellite IoT? And if yes, then what are the restrictions, or I mean, what is the best which can be achieved?
Question was, continue, who wants to take this? Low latency, yeah. No.
Okay, so I think the answer, so from where we are a geostationary operator getting into a multi-orbit strategy, multi-orbit constellation very soon. The answer to your question specific to India is yes, I think nothing stops from having a low latency service for IoT devices in India, considering the current regulatory regime. You should have the likes of OneWeb and Hughes who should be able to operate it. I think the big question is not the availability of the service. The big question is back to my point, which is economics. Can that service be delivered affordably, including the terminals? It's not just the service that I'm talking about. The terminal, which is going to be tracking a LEO satellite, which is moving rapidly across the horizon and then switching over to the next one, which comes behind the first one. I think that is the more critical aspect of the question rather than the availability as such.
All right, yeah, some of you really wanted to add something. I'll give you the last word.
I think what Gaurav wants to say is that Geo can give you a service with low latency, but he's shy to say it.
Yeah.
See, if you look at LEO startups that are doing IoT, I've looked at few of them. Depends on the constellation design, but they're looking into 15 minutes passing between every satellite and the other one. There are certain use cases that are maybe suited and can be served well by LEO IoT constellations, and we're working with some of them. But we're also working on a Geo IoT solution, which can satisfy a latency in terms of few seconds for an IoT solution. And in terms of form factor of the device and the power and the link margin, we're really talking about the same thing. There's no big differentiation. I mean, in terms of LEO IoT constellations and GEO, what GEO can deliver. I'm talking specifically in terms of LNS band kind of frequency bands or constellations.
So for example, if we are talking about the fisherman example or the collision, train collision kind of example. So for example, the fisherman example can be maybe more easily, might have low latency, might have, relaxed kind of requirements. But for example, if we are talking about train collision or maybe going forward, if we are talking about autonomous vehicles, then the latency requirements can be really so satellite has satellite IoT might have some restrictions in supporting some of the use cases going forward. This is what I
True. And one of the systems that we're working on, there is also the capability to prioritize messaging. So there are certain messagings like alarms, that you need to be delivered very quickly. So those messages will have priority over other types of messages. So there are certain mechanisms, certain techniques that you can achieve even lower latency, but at the end of the day, you're limited by the physical design of the constellation, whether GEO or LEO.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, yeah, no, I think the time is up, and Indian lunch, I'm definitely not going to skip on that. So with that, I thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a great discussion. Clearly a lot of potential here in India, globally in the market, and there's still some hard work ahead of us, but I think the future looks bright. So thank you, please.
Very rightly said, so. Heartfelt regards to all the dignitaries present here in the audience and the panels. I guess it was a very insightful session. Now we will move for the lunch, please. VIPs and speakers can move to the Goel hall, and delegates are most welcome in the TA area so that we all can resume by the next session by 2:30. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. It was a very good session.